Ravi walked slowly down the long metal corridor of Haven Ring, the great orbital station that circled a blue and green world far below. His steps echoed softly on the floor, a sound most people ignored. He pushed his cleaning cart, filled with simple tools, a mop, brushes, cloths, and a container of water. It was not glamorous work, but it was honest, and it kept him close to his daughter. Every morning began the same way. The station's workers rushed past him, carrying tablets, shouting about schedules, or speaking quickly into their headsets. They hardly looked in his direction. To them, Ravi was only the cleaner, the man who polished floors and wiped down panels. They never stopped to think that he was also a father, or that behind his tired smile there was a life filled with its own challenges and quiet strengths. Ravi did not mind the lack of attention. He had learned long ago that being invisible was sometimes safer than being seen. Still, in quiet moments, he felt the weight of it. He wondered if anyone realized that he noticed the small details they overlooked, the details that could sometimes matter more than all their meetings and plans. The corridor curved gently, following the round shape of the station. Through wide windows he saw the curve of the planet below. White clouds drifted across its surface, covering oceans and mountains. Ravi paused for a moment, breathing in the sight. He always felt a calmness when he looked down at that world. Somewhere down there were endless fields, forests, and cities. Somewhere down there was a better life he once dreamed of giving his family. But life had turned out differently. Ravi was a single father. Years ago, when his wife became sick, he had done everything he could to care for her, but the illness spread too quickly. He was left with only his daughter, Mira, who was still small at the time. Since then, he carried the double burden of being both father and mother. He worked where he could, taking shifts no one else wanted, as long as it meant he could be close to her. On Haven Ring, cleaners were often overlooked, but the job came with quarters where Mira could stay, food vouchers to keep her healthy, and enough credits to send her to the station school. For Ravi, that was enough reason to endure the long hours and the way others brushed past him without even a nod. That morning, after finishing the east corridor, Ravi went to the central hub. He carefully polished the chrome railing, his movements steady and patient. A group of engineers hurried by, their boots clanging on the metal floor. One of them accidentally knocked over a small container, spilling bright fluid across the floor. They did not even notice. Ravi sighed softly, knelt down, and cleaned the spill before it could spread further. He worked in silence, watching how the liquid rolled across the smooth surface, catching reflections from the overhead lights. It was not only cleaning to him. He saw patterns in everything. The way fluids flowed, the way lights flickered, the way a faint vibration could carry through the floor. He paid attention to these things, because he had to. Mira often asked him questions when they sat together in the evening, and he never wanted to disappoint her. "Why does the air sound different near the reactor wing, Papa?" she once asked him. "It is the machines, Mira," Ravi had replied. "They breathe, just like we do. The sound changes when they are working hard, or when something is wrong." She had nodded, her eyes wide with curiosity. That was what he loved about her most, the way she looked at the world as if it were a great puzzle waiting to be solved. By the end of his shift, Ravi moved toward the residential quarter. His back ached slightly, but he did not complain. He pushed the cart into the storage room, placed the mop neatly in its corner, and closed the door behind him. Then he walked to his small cabin, where Mira was already waiting. The moment he opened the door, she ran to him with a bright smile. "Papa, did you see the planet today?" The clouds looked like waves, she said excitedly. Ravi laughed softly. I saw them. You are right. They looked like waves rolling across the sky. He sat with her at the small table, where a simple meal waited. As they ate, Mira continued to ask questions. She wanted to know how the recycling systems worked, why the corridors curved, and how the giant reactor kept the station alive. Ravi answered as best as he could, using simple words, sometimes drawing shapes with his finger on the table. He was not a scientist, but he had spent years watching, listening, and remembering. He knew enough to guide her curious mind. When the lights dimmed to mark evening, Ravi tucked Mira into bed. She hugged him tightly, whispering, "One day, Papa, I want to understand everything about this place. I want to make it better." Ravi kissed her forehead and smiled. "You will, Mira. You will see what others miss. Just keep asking questions." After she fell asleep, Ravi sat quietly by the window. Stars filled the blackness outside, scattered like tiny sparks. He thought about the people on the station, the officers, the scientists, the traders so busy with their duties that they forgot to notice the small things. They thought he was only a cleaner. But in truth, he had been watching the station for years, noticing every hum, every flicker, every tremor. He carried all that knowledge silently, never seeking credit, never being asked. For now, that was enough. He had Mira, and he had his quiet role. He did not know yet that soon, the same details he observed so carefully would mean the difference between disaster and survival. For now, he was only the overlooked man with a mop, walking unseen through the halls of Haven Ring. Mira sat by the window of their small cabin, her chin resting on her hands. Outside, the endless stars stretched across the dark, with the blue planet glowing below the station. She never grew tired of looking at it. To her, it felt like a secret treasure that only she and her father truly admired. Others rushed past the windows every day without pausing, but Mira could sit there for hours, imagining stories about the lands and oceans below. Ravi entered quietly after finishing his early shift. His boots were dusty from the long corridors, and his shirt carried faint marks of cleaning fluid. Yet his face softened when he saw his daughter staring outside with such wonder. He placed a small packet of fruit pieces on the table, one of the small luxuries he sometimes received as part of his work. "Papa, do you think those clouds are heavy?" Mira asked suddenly, her eyes still fixed on the planet. Ravi smiled as he removed his gloves. "Clouds look heavy, but they are not. They are made of tiny drops of water. If you were there, you could walk under them without worry." Mira turned her head. "But if they are not heavy, why do they look so thick?" "Because light passes through them in many ways," Ravi explained gently. "When the sun shines, the light scatters. That makes the clouds look bright and full. It is only an illusion." She thought about that, nodding slowly. For a girl her age, she carried a hunger for answers that was stronger than most adults. Each evening became a lesson, with Ravi as both father and teacher. He was not a man of high education, but years of careful observation had made him wise in quiet ways. After their small meal, Mira pulled out her notebook, a simple pad of thin paper she guarded closely. She opened it to show her father drawings she had made of the station's corridors. Some lines were straight, others curved, and beside them she had written questions in uneven handwriting. "Papa, why does the corridor near the reactor feel warmer than the others?" she asked. Ravi studied her drawing. "Because the reactor gives off heat, even when it is controlled. The walls near it carry some of that warmth. But why does it make a humming sound at night? She pressed. Ravi leaned back. Machines speak in their own way. That hum is the pumps moving coolant to keep the reactor calm. If that sound changes, it means the machine is not happy. Mira scribbled notes quickly, her brow furrowed in concentration. To her, every sound and every flicker of light on the station was a clue, and she wanted to solve the puzzle. Later that evening, they walked together through the residential quarter. The corridors were quieter there, with soft lighting and fewer people rushing past. Mira held her father's hand, skipping a little as she asked more questions. Why does the air smell different near the recycling bay? Because that is where old air is cleaned and made fresh again, Ravi replied. Sometimes the filters leave a faint smell, like metal. Why do the lights in the east corridor flicker more than the ones here? Because the wires are older in that section. No one has replaced them yet. To Ravi, these were simple observations. To Mira, they were treasures of knowledge, pieces of understanding that she could string together into a larger picture. She felt proud when she noticed things before others, and her father encouraged her with patience. When they returned to their cabin, Mira asked another question that made Ravi pause. Papa, if you see so many things, why don't you tell the leaders? Wouldn't they want to know? Ravi looked at her carefully. He thought about the engineers who ignored him, the officers who never even glanced his way, and the officials who passed by as if he were invisible. Then he shook his head gently. They do not always listen to people like us. Sometimes, people only hear what they expect. But it is not important. What matters is that you listen, and that you see what others miss. Mira frowned, not fully understanding. But if something is wrong, shouldn't someone say it? Yes, Ravi admitted softly. But sometimes people do not believe until they see it themselves. That is why we must keep watching. That night, after she was asleep, Ravi sat once again by the window. He thought about her words. Perhaps one day Mira would be in a place where people did listen, where her questions would carry weight. For now, she was still a child, full of wonder, and it was his duty to guide her. The next day, Ravi carried out his cleaning rounds as usual. He moved through the hub, polishing the railings and wiping panels, when he heard two officers speaking loudly nearby. The reactor alarms flickered last night, one said. It must have been another glitch. The other officer shrugged. These systems are old. It happens. Nothing to worry about. They walked away quickly, their voices fading. Ravi frowned but said nothing. Later, when he passed the reactor wing, he pressed his hand lightly against the wall. The familiar hum was there, but it was not steady. It pulsed in uneven rhythms, almost like a skipped heartbeat. He stood there for a long moment, his brow furrowed. Others might not have noticed, but Ravi had been listening to that sound for years. He knew its rhythm better than most engineers. Something was changing. Something was not right. That evening, Mira noticed his silence at dinner. Papa, is something wrong? She asked softly. Ravi forced a small smile. No, Mira. Nothing is wrong. I am only tired. But inside, his thoughts were restless. He could not ignore what he had heard. He knew machines as if they were living things. And when a living thing's heartbeat changed, it meant trouble. He tucked Mira into bed as usual, yet his eyes lingered on her peaceful face. He thought of the officers who dismissed the alarms, of the engineers who never listened to him, and of the countless people on Haven Ring who depended on the reactor to survive. He whispered to himself, we must keep watching. What he did not realize was that his daughter's endless curiosity would soon become the spark that connected everything he had noticed. And together, their quiet attention would matter more than anyone else imagined. The morning began like any other on Haven Ring. The station lights brightened slowly, simulating sunrise, though no real sun could reach them in the endless dark of space. Workers hurried through the corridors, voices echoing against the metal walls. Doors opened and closed, lifts carried people between levels, and the steady hum of machinery filled the background like a heartbeat. Ravi walked quietly among them, pushing his cleaning cart. His eyes moved carefully from one detail to another, as they always did. To others, it looked like he was simply scanning for dirt or spills, but in truth, he was listening and watching for small changes that most people ignored. That day, his route took him again near the reactor wing. It was an area most workers avoided unless they had a duty there. The long hallway leading to the reactor was warmer, the air heavier with the faint smell of heated metal. To Ravi, it always carried a presence, like the breath of a giant animal that never slept. As he polished the wall panels, he paused. The sound in the background was wrong again. The hum of the pumps, which normally beat in steady rhythm, now carried uneven notes. It reminded him of a drum being played out of time. He set his mop aside and pressed his palm flat against the wall. The vibration confirmed his worry. It pulsed irregularly, too sharp in some places, too faint in others. Ravi frowned and leaned closer, listening with all his attention. He had no tools, no instruments, only his senses. Yet those senses had been sharpened by years of quiet observation. The station might not respect his work, but he knew when something was different. After a long pause, he decided to speak to someone. He rolled his cart toward the engineering checkpoint, where a young man in a technician's uniform sat behind a desk, scrolling through data on his screen. "Excuse me," Ravi said politely. "I think something may be wrong with the pumps near the reactor. The sound is not steady." The technician glanced up, surprised to see the cleaner speaking to him. He chuckled lightly, shaking his head. "Don't worry about that. These machines always sound strange. If there's a real issue, the system will alert us. Go on, do your work." Ravi opened his mouth to say more, but the young man had already returned to his screen. With a sigh, Ravi pushed his cart away. He did not want to argue. Still, the uneasiness remained in his chest. Later in the day, he passed near the same hall again. This time he noticed a thin line of condensation along one of the pipes. It glittered faintly under the lights. He ran his finger along it and felt the dampness. That pipe had never sweated like this before. It meant the temperature inside was rising higher than normal. He looked around. No one else was nearby. The hallway was silent except for the hum. He thought about calling the technician again, but he remembered the dismissive smile and the careless words. Instead, he simply memorized the spot, pressing the image into his mind. That evening, Ravi returned to his cabin. Mira was waiting for him with her notebook open. She had drawn another diagram of the station, this time focusing on the central hub. "Papa," she said eagerly, "why does the light near the water tanks blink so much? I counted 6 times today." Ravi smiled faintly, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He sat down beside her and touched the paper. "Lights blink when the circuits are tired. But the important thing is to notice the pattern. If you count and remember, you can tell if the problem is growing worse." Mira nodded and wrote down his words. Then she looked at him more closely. "Papa, you are quiet today. Did something happen?" Ravi hesitated. He did not want to worry her, but she was too sharp to be fooled. Finally, he spoke softly. I think the reactor pumps are not happy. I told a technician, but he did not believe me. Mira frowned. But you hear the machines better than anyone. If you say they are not happy, then they are not happy. Her simple faith touched him. He smiled faintly and placed a hand on her shoulder. Maybe I am only imagining it. But we must keep listening. Machines do not lie. That night, after Mira had gone to sleep, Ravi sat again by the window. He stared at the stars, his mind restless. He thought about the condensation on the pipe, the uneven hum, the technician's careless laugh. He thought about the thousands of people living on Haven Ring, sleeping peacefully without knowing the danger that might be building. He whispered to himself, if they will not see, I must see for them. The next morning, he deliberately returned to the reactor hall early. The shift had barely begun, and the hallway was empty. He leaned once more against the wall, listening. The vibration was stronger now. It carried a harsh edge, almost like a growl. As he turned to leave, a small alarm light flickered red for just a second before returning to green. He froze, watching it closely. A single blink. Short, sharp, and gone. To anyone else, it might have looked like nothing. To Ravi, it was a warning. Machines, like people, sometimes sent out small cries before breaking completely. When he left the hall, his face was calm, but his heart was heavy. He could not ignore what he had seen and heard. Something was coming. At dinner, Mira noticed his silence again. You are thinking about the machines, aren't you? She asked. Yes, Ravi admitted. They are trying to tell us something. Then we must keep listening, she said firmly. Her words gave him strength. He realized he was not alone. His daughter believed him, even if no one else did. Together, they would keep watching. Together, they would notice what others refused to see. For now, the danger was still hidden. But the signs were growing stronger, and Ravi knew he could not stay silent much longer. Life on Haven Ring never slowed down. Every day, officials hurried to meetings, engineers rushed between systems, and traders bargained in the markets. The station felt alive, buzzing with voices and footsteps, but behind the noise there was always the steady hum of the reactor deep inside the core. Few paid attention to that sound. Few cared about it, except for one man with a mop and his curious daughter. Ravi began his day as usual, pushing his cart along the curved corridors. He scrubbed away scuff marks, polished panels, and emptied waste bins, all while listening carefully. To most people, cleaning was dull work, but to him it was a way to observe. Every sound, every flicker, every tremor reached his ears. And lately, the sounds from the reactor wing were changing in ways he did not like. By now, the hum was no longer faint. It pulsed stronger, with uneven beats that unsettled him. The vibration spread farther along the walls, as if the whole station could feel the struggle of the machines. When he placed his hand against the panel that morning, it felt warmer than before. He continued on his route, but his thoughts were heavy. He wanted to warn someone again, yet he remembered the laugh of the technician who ignored him. If the engineers did not believe, what else could he do? He sighed and returned to his work. Later that day, while cleaning near the central hub, he heard something that caught his attention. A soft alarm buzzed in the distance, quick and sharp, then stopped. He looked up. Around him, people continued walking, unconcerned. No one even flinched. Moments later, two officers passed by, speaking to each other. The alarms near the reactor came on again last night, one said. They went off after a second. Another glitch. The other officer nodded. Old system. Happens all the time. They kept walking, dismissing the issue as if it were nothing. Ravi frowned. He knew machines did not cry out for no reason. An alarm might blink once, but even a blink carried meaning. He felt an urge to follow the officers and tell them what he had seen and heard, but his feet stayed in place. He had learned that words from a cleaner rarely changed anything. That evening, he returned home quieter than usual. Mira noticed at once. She was sitting cross-legged on the floor, working in her notebook. She had drawn the reactor wing, though her sketch was simple and uneven. "Papa, you are worried again," she said softly. Ravi sat beside her and stroked her hair. "The alarms came on again today. Only for a moment. Everyone says it is nothing." "But you do not think so," she replied. "No," he admitted. "I do not." Mira looked down at her drawing, then back at him. "If no one listens, then we must listen harder. Maybe we can understand more than they do." Her words made him smile faintly. She had a way of turning his worry into quiet courage. He hugged her close, whispering, "Yes, little one. We will keep watching." The next morning, Ravi deliberately began his shift near the reactor. The hallway was dim, the walls lined with thick pipes and humming panels. He moved slowly, pretending to mop the floor, but his eyes were fixed on the small indicators built into the walls. One of the gauges showed pressure levels. Normally, the needle sat steady near the middle. Now it quivered slightly, shaking as if uncertain of its place. He bent closer, studying it. After a long moment, the needle jerked upward, then fell back again. A tiny movement, but enough to make his chest tighten. He straightened and glanced around. No engineers were nearby. No officers walked the hall. Only he had seen it. He thought of Mira and the questions she always asked. She would have told him to write it down, to remember every detail. So he did. That evening, when he returned home, he drew the gauge for her, showing how the needle had moved. Mira studied his drawing seriously. "It looks like the machine is trying to tell us it is tired," she said. "Yes," Ravi agreed. "That is what it feels like." She added the drawing to her notebook, then wrote underneath in her uneven handwriting, "Machine heartbeat is changing." She looked at her father with determination. "If no one listens, then one day they will see. We must be ready." Ravi felt a strange comfort in her words. Though she was only a child, she carried a wisdom that matched his own quiet patience. Together, they were noticing what others ignored. Days passed, and the signs grew stronger. The condensation on the pipes thickened into droplets that sometimes dripped onto the floor. The hum became rougher, with sharp notes that scraped against the ears. The vibration spread farther, until even in the central hub Ravi thought he could feel a faint tremor under his boots. Yet still, the leaders of the station held meetings about trade, politics, and schedules. They spoke loudly in the halls, never mentioning the reactor. To them, life went on as normal. One evening, as Ravi finished his shift, he overheard two scientists talking near the lifts. "The readings from the reactor core are inconsistent," one said, frowning at his tablet. "It is probably the sensors again," the other replied. "Those things give false data half the time." But what if the lift door closed before Ravi could hear more? He stood there for a moment, gripping the handle of his cart tightly. The scientists had noticed something too, even if they dismissed it. That gave him a strange mix of fear and hope. Fear, because it confirmed the danger. Hope, because maybe someone else was finally paying attention. When he reached home, Mira was waiting with her usual questions. But that night, he did not answer right away. He sat down heavily, rubbing his forehead. "Papa," she asked softly. He looked at her, seeing her small face lit by the dim cabin light. "The machines are struggling more each day. Others notice, but they still turn away." "Then you must not turn away," she said firmly. "You must keep watching. One day they will have to listen." Her words gave him strength again. He nodded slowly. "Yes. We will not turn away." That night, as the station lights dimmed and silence spread across the corridors, Ravi lay awake in his bunk. The hum of the reactor was faint even here, a low vibration that touched every wall and floor. He listened carefully, his heart uneasy. He did not know when the moment would come, but he felt it drawing closer. The station was quiet that night. Most workers had returned to their cabins, and the main corridors felt empty. The lights were dimmed to evening mode, soft and pale, casting long shadows along the curved walls. For many, this was a time of rest. But Ravi could not sleep. He sat on the edge of his bunk, staring at the floor, while Mira slept peacefully nearby. The faint hum of the reactor reached even their cabin, and tonight it sounded sharper than ever. He felt the vibrations travel through the floor, irregular and uneasy, like a giant heart struggling to beat. He rose silently, careful not to wake his daughter. He pulled on his work boots and stepped out into the corridor. He told himself it was only a walk, but deep down he knew where his steps were leading. His cart was locked in storage, but he did not need it now. He walked with empty hands, guided by instinct and unease. The hallways were nearly deserted. A few late workers passed him without a glance, their eyes on their tablets. Ravi moved quietly, his ears tuned to every sound. The closer he came to the reactor wing, the stronger the vibration grew. It seemed to throb through the walls, carrying a low warning. When he entered the reactor hall, he froze. The air was heavy, filled with the faint smell of heated metal. Steam leaked from a joint in one of the pipes, curling upward in thin streams. The floor beneath it was damp with condensation. Warning lights flickered across a control panel, red and yellow, blinking in uneven patterns. Yet no alarms rang loudly through the station. No guards rushed in. No engineers stood watch. Ravi's chest tightened. This was no glitch. The reactor was in trouble, and no one else had noticed. He stepped closer, his eyes darting from panel to pipe. He had no training, no badge of authority, yet he knew these machines like old neighbors. He had listened to them for years, memorized their rhythms, and studied their signs. And tonight, those signs screamed of danger. The pressure gauge needle shook violently now, climbing higher and dropping again. The hum of the pump stuttered, sometimes loud, sometimes fading almost to silence. The heat radiating from the wall made his skin prickle. He whispered under his breath, "It is failing." His first thought was of Mira. She was sleeping safely in their cabin, unaware of the danger beneath her feet. If the reactor failed, the entire station could be destroyed in moments. Thousands of lives, including hers, depended on what happened now. Ravi looked around. The emergency controls were marked clearly, though most people never gave them a second glance. He had cleaned them often, wiping dust from the levers and switches. He knew where each one was placed. He knew which valve connected to the coolant pipes and which switch reset the pump cycles. He had never touched them, but his memory held every detail. He stepped to the first valve and placed his hand on it. The metal was warm, almost burning. He hesitated. Was he right to interfere? What if he made things worse? But then he remembered the technicians who ignored him, the officers who dismissed the alarms, the scientists who called it a glitch. No one else was here. No one else was listening. He took a deep breath and turned the valve slowly. At once, a hiss of coolant rushed through the pipes, and the hum of one pump steadied for a moment before faltering again. The vibration grew louder in another section, and Ravi realized the system was unbalanced. He moved quickly to the next valve, adjusting it carefully, just as he had seen in the diagrams posted on the walls. The warning lights flashed brighter. The pressure needle jumped. His heart pounded. He felt sweat on his forehead, though the air was already damp and hot. He remembered Mira's words, "Machines have heartbeats. If their rhythm changes, it means they are tired." He thought of the reactor as a great living thing, gasping for breath. He had to steady its rhythm, or it would collapse. He pulled a heavy lever on the control panel. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a deep shudder ran through the floor as the backup pumps activated. The hum grew steadier, though still uneven. Another set of lights turned from red to yellow, then to green. Ravi allowed himself one quick breath of relief. But then another alarm flickered across the panel, showing rising heat in a secondary chamber. He rushed to the manual override, gripping the wheel with both hands. It resisted him, stiff and unmoving. He strained, muscles burning, until finally the wheel began to turn. Slowly, the heat reading lowered. The pipes groaned, releasing a hiss of steam, but the pressure dropped back toward safe levels. The hall was filled with sound now. Pumps roared, valves hissed, and lights blinked frantically. To Ravi, it was chaos, yet also a language. He listened, he adjusted, he moved quickly from one control to another. Each step was guided by years of quiet watching, by memories of every flicker and vibration he had ever noticed. Minutes passed like hours. His body ached, his hands stung, but he kept going. At last, the main warning lights dimmed. The pressure gauge settled near the center. The hum of the pumps grew steady once more, beating in calm rhythm. The reactor was stable again. Ravi sank against the wall, breathing hard. His shirt clung to his back, soaked with sweat. For a long moment, he closed his eyes, listening. The machine's heartbeat was strong again. Only then did he realize what he had done. A cleaner, dismissed by everyone, had stood alone in the reactor hall and stopped a disaster. He thought of Mira, safe in their cabin, and a quiet smile touched his lips. Footsteps echoed down the hall. At last, the engineers had arrived, drawn by delayed alerts and confused readings. They rushed in, eyes wide as they saw the reset panels, the adjusted valves, and the steady gauges. They looked at Ravi, standing there with tired hands, and froze in disbelief. "What are you doing here?" one demanded. Ravi did not answer. He only stepped back, letting them see for themselves. The danger had passed, but the truth had just begun to unfold. The engineers stared at the panels, at the reset valves, and then back at Ravi. Their faces showed shock, confusion, and even disbelief. One of them, a tall man with thin glasses, stepped closer to the control board. He touched the levers, as if to make sure they were real. This should not be possible, he whispered. The systems were failing. The backup should not have started in time. Another engineer, younger and sharper in tone, pointed at Ravi. What are you doing here? You are not allowed inside this chamber. How did you even know what to touch? Ravi stood quietly, his hands by his sides. He was tired, his arms still aching from turning the heavy wheels, but his gaze was calm. He did not answer right away. He knew anything he said would sound strange to them. After all, who would believe that a cleaner had saved the reactor when trained staff had not even noticed the danger? The older engineer shook his head. Whoever touched these controls saved us. That much is clear. Look at the gauges. Look at the heat levels. We were minutes away from a full failure. The younger one frowned. But, he is just a cleaner. Ravi finally spoke, his voice steady but quiet. Machines tell stories if you listen. I heard the sound change. I followed the rhythm. I did what was needed. His words hung in the hot, humming air. The engineers exchanged uneasy glances. None of them wanted to admit that they had missed the signs. None of them wanted to say that a man with no rank had done what they could not. Soon, security officers arrived, summoned by the late alarms. They questioned Ravi, asking why he was here, why he had touched restricted controls. Their voices were sharp, but their eyes were uncertain. The room itself told the truth. The reactor was stable. The danger had passed. One officer finally muttered, if he had not acted, we would all be gone. The engineers did not reply. They busied themselves with checking the systems again, pressing buttons and making notes. But Ravi noticed how their hands trembled slightly. They were shaken. Ravi was escorted out of the hall. As he walked back through the corridors, he thought only of Mira. She was safe, and that was enough for him. He did not care for titles or thanks. All he wanted was for his daughter to have another morning on this station, another chance to laugh and dream. When he returned to his cabin, Mira was still asleep. The faint glow of the corridor light slipped through the door and touched her small face. Ravi sat down quietly, listening to her gentle breathing. Relief washed over him like a tide. He had done what he must. That was enough. But the story did not end there. The next day, whispers spread through the station. Workers spoke in hushed tones in the cafeteria. Some said a technician had stopped the reactor from failing. Others claimed an emergency system had saved them. No one knew the full truth, but the rumor grew. People felt the unease of how close they had come to disaster. By noon, Ravi was called into the station office. A group of officers and administrators waited for him. Their faces were serious, their voices careful. Ravi, one said slowly, we have reports that you entered the reactor hall last night. Is this true? Ravi stood straight and nodded once. And did you touch the controls? Yes, he answered simply. A pause followed. The administrators glanced at one another, as though trying to decide what to say. Finally, the officer at the center cleared his throat. You understand this is not permitted. Cleaners are not trained for reactor operations. It is against regulation. Ravi's voice was calm. I understand. But if I had not touched them, the reactor would have failed. The signs were clear. I only listened. The room was silent. None of the officials could deny what had happened. Their own data confirmed it. The pressure had dropped, the heat had stabilized, and the backups had engaged. The logs showed the exact moment the manual controls had been used. At last, the officer sighed. We cannot ignore this. The truth is clear. You acted when others did not. You prevented an accident that could have destroyed us all. Ravi did not answer. He did not need to. He had not acted for praise. Still, the officials looked unsettled. One of them finally spoke in a low voice. A cleaner saving a reactor, people will not believe it. They will ask questions. They will wonder what it means for our systems, for our training, for our future. Another leaned forward. Maybe it is better if we keep this quiet. Say the backup systems engaged as designed. Let the story end there. Ravi listened, but he did not argue. He knew how the world worked. He was not seeking fame. He only wanted peace for himself and his daughter. When the meeting ended, he was dismissed without punishment. He walked out into the corridor once more, free but unnoticed. To the wider station, nothing had changed. Life went on. The officers would protect their pride. The engineers would keep silent. But not everyone believed the official story. The whispers continued. Some workers remembered seeing Ravi near the reactor that night. Others noticed how the engineers avoided talking about what had happened. A quiet respect began to grow in corners of the station where gossip thrived. That evening, as Ravi shared a simple meal with Mira, she looked up at him with her curious eyes. "Papa," she asked, "why are people looking at us today?" Ravi smiled softly. "Because sometimes, when no one is watching, a person must do what is right. And people notice, even if they do not say it." Mira thought for a moment, then nodded. "Like when a machine is tired, and someone helps it rest." "Yes," Ravi said, placing a hand on her head gently. "Just like that." The hum of the reactor filled the background once more, steady and calm. To most, it was only a sound. To Ravi, it was proof that his daughter would see another day. And though the station did not announce his name, though no medal was pinned to his chest, in the hearts of those who whispered in secret, a new story had begun. A story of a man no one valued, who had saved them all with quiet hands and steady courage. The station slowly returned to normal after the near disaster. Workers moved through the corridors as if nothing had happened. Alarms no longer flickered. Machines hummed in steady rhythm. The blue planet below continued to glow, indifferent to the human struggles above. Ravi pushed his cleaning cart through the central hub, his eyes calm. He had returned to his regular duties, mopping floors, wiping panels, and moving quietly among the busy workers. To most, he was still just a cleaner, invisible and ordinary. Yet, inside, he carried the memory of the night he had saved the reactor. It had been tense, exhausting, and dangerous. But he had done what was necessary. The whispers of his courage circulated quietly among the workers. A few engineers exchanged subtle nods when they saw him. They did not announce his name, nor did the station leadership praise him publicly. But in the small corners of the station, people began to notice. They spoke in hushed tones about the cleaner who had acted when others hesitated. Ravi, however, paid little attention. His focus remained on Mira. She was curious and bright, and he wanted her to grow up knowing that courage often came quietly. When he returned home that evening, she was waiting with her notebook in hand. Her eyes lit up when she saw him. "Papa," she said eagerly, "did they notice what you did?" Ravi smiled gently and shook his head. "Some noticed. Some will talk about it quietly. But it does not matter. What matters is that we did what was right." Mira frowned thoughtfully. I want to remember everything. I want to write it in my notebook. I want to learn from you. He ruffled her hair. Then pay attention to small things. Watch the machines, listen to the sounds, notice the changes. That is how you understand what others do not. She nodded seriously. I will, Papa. Days passed, and life on Haven Ring continued. Meetings, trades, and routines carried on as before. Engineers monitored the reactor closely, following standard protocols. Officers walked the halls, carrying their duties without pause. And yet, in the quiet corners where people paused to talk, Ravi's actions were remembered. One day, as he polished the railings near the central hub, an engineer approached him. He was a young man who had worked on the station for several years. I wanted to say, thank you, the engineer said quietly. I saw the logs. You stabilized the reactor before anyone else noticed. I did not know a cleaner could do that. Ravi nodded politely. I did what needed to be done. That is all. The engineer smiled faintly and walked away. It was not praise, but it was recognition. And for Ravi, that was enough. Later that evening, as Ravi and Mira walked to their cabin, she looked up at him. Papa, will people always forget the small heroes? Ravi considered the question. Sometimes people forget, Mira. But that does not make their actions any less important. Courage is not about applause. It is about doing the right thing when it matters most. She looked at him thoughtfully. Then I want to be like you. I want to see what others miss and help when I can. He smiled, feeling proud. You already are, in your own way. Remember, listening carefully and noticing what others ignore is just as important as acting. One day, you may save more than a machine. You may save people too. The reactor hummed steadily below as they entered their cabin. The air felt calm, and the heat of the system had returned to normal. Ravi checked on Mira, making sure she was comfortable and ready for sleep. He felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that their vigilance had preserved the lives of thousands. Over the following weeks, the station gradually learned to respect quiet observation. Engineers began to notice small irregularities more closely. Officers started paying attention to reports from all levels of the station, no matter who submitted them. And in subtle ways, the story of Ravi's courage influenced others. He remained the same man, walking through corridors with his cleaning cart, polishing floors, and maintaining his usual calm. He did not seek recognition. He did not demand it. He only continued to observe, to teach Mira, and to ensure that the station remained safe. One evening, he stood by the window, looking out at the planet below. Mira joined him, pressing her small hand against the glass. She gazed at the clouds drifting lazily across the blue oceans. Papa, she said, do you think the world will ever notice us? Ravi smiled and knelt beside her. Some worlds notice quickly, and others slowly. What matters is that we do what we can, and that we stay ready. One day, the world will see. Until then, we keep doing what is right. She nodded, her eyes shining with determination. I will remember, Papa. I will listen and watch. He hugged her tightly, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the station lights. It was the warmth of hope, of quiet courage, and of a life where ordinary people could do extraordinary things. The hum of the reactor filled the background, steady and calm. For most, it was just a sound. But for Ravi and Mira, it was a reminder that vigilance, care, and courage mattered more than rank or recognition. Humanity's strength was not in who was seen or praised, but in those who quietly ensured life continued safely. In the corridors of Haven Ring, the story of a single dad and cleaner remained mostly unspoken. Yet, in the hearts of those who knew the truth, it was remembered as a story of quiet heroism. And for Ravi, that was enough. He had saved a reactor, protected a station, and, most importantly, kept his daughter safe. The world might not know his name, but humanity had gained a hero anyway. As the station lights dimmed for the night, Ravi and Mira sat together by the window, watching the planet glow below. Silence surrounded them, calm and reassuring. He whispered to her, "We will always be ready, Mira. We will always listen." She smiled softly, leaning against him. "Yes, Papa. Always."